So it's 7th of July 2020, and today marks exactly 15 years since the London bombings of 2005. Those attacks remain the worst terrorist attack in London's history, that is, in peacetime, um, and the worst in England's history as well. So 52 civilians killed, hundreds wounded. The four attackers also died. Um, I was in London that week, and it was quite an eventful week. I remember that being a very eventful week, actually. So that week in July 2005, um, there was a Live 8 concert, the big, huge concert for Make Poverty History, which involved a lot of big names, um, people like Bill Gates, Brad Pitt, Dido, a whole host of other people that had come on the 20th anniversary of the Live Aid concert. A huge event. I actually won a ticket to that. Unfortunately, I didn't have anyone to accompany me with, but very memorable event. Massive crowd. If you imagine a quarter of a million people in Hyde Park, that's what it was like. Crazy. Um, I actually missed my train back up to the northeast, and I basically had to sleep rough. I tried to get into a hostel, and they were all booked up. So I remember going to Earl's Court. Rumors had been going around that there was a hostel there that was quite big, and they were just all booked up. So I basically slept rough that night. I slept on a bench in Trafalgar Square. It was a long night, and I'd been awake the full day before going to London. So I was shattered. Never in my life was I so tired as those couple of days. I remember getting to King's Cross Station. This was before it was remodeled, but getting to King's Cross Station, and I just fell asleep flat on the concourse. I was so exhausted. But also that week, there were commemoration events for World War II. Now, I'm not sure specifically what those would have been because this was July, of course, so it wasn't VE Day or VJ Day. I'm not sure, but I do recall there was a lot of things going on at that time to do with the 60th anniversary of the end of World War II. So that was very much going on. There was a G8 summit in Gleneagles, hosted by Tony Blair. And of course, Blair was informed of the attacks while he was at the summit in Scotland. Um, and the big focus on that summit was Make Poverty History campaign and the Millennium Development Goals. London won the Olympic bid that week, beating Paris, London's old rival, Paris. I remember the jubilation that was so quickly became, consternation and despair, the news of the attacks unfolding. And then, of course, 7/7, all in one week. So that was really a very eventful week. Um, and yeah, today marks 15 years. So I don't want to say anything particularly profound, but we have seen the true ugly face of Islamism since then. We've seen the Manchester bombing. We've seen the Westminster Bridge attack, the London Bridge attack, this year the Reading attack, the Fishmongers Hall attack last year, um, and numerous other incidents connected with Islamic extremism. So I think it still remains one of our gravest threats. I think that China and Russia pose state threats, but I think as an ideology, Pan-Islamist extremism is still very, very real. And still, 15 years on, there are some on the left who will not fully acknowledge this. They will still churn out their Islamophobia narrative whenever the issue of Islamic extremism is brought up, and they'll try to make equivalency between the far right and Islamists. If you look over the last 10 years, there have been far right incidents. For example, the murder of Joe Cox, the murder of Mohammed Salim in Birmingham, and the Finsbury Mosque attack. And there are certainly active and very dangerous cells out there, or rather groups, the likes of Combat 18. But in terms of actual casualties, the data suggests that Islamism is the bigger threat. Um, and I still think some people are not fully prepared to call it by name. Um, I do hope Starmer takes a different approach from Corbyn. I hope he doesn't get politically correct on this. and not call Islamic extremism because that's what it is. And just briefly to conclude this, for those Muslims who say it's got nothing to do with Islam, um, some of us see that for what it is, sheer propaganda. You cannot divorce Islamic extremism from Islam. You may condemn terrorism. You may have nothing to do with terrorists, right? That's obvious. There's about 3 million Muslims in Britain. Well, 2 to 3 million. Of course, the vast majority of them condemn terrorism. But you cannot tell me that organizations like ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Taiba in South Asia, the remnants of Al Qaeda, and other such groups. You cannot tell me they're just somehow disconnected to Islam and they don't have an extreme interpretation of Islam. You cannot tell me that when people are brutally persecuted in countries like Pakistan for alleged blasphemy, that's got nothing to do with Islam. This is a dynamic here, actually. Very often you'll see that, for example, Pakistani Islamists will say that they condemn terrorism, but they would absolutely support the stoning of a blasphemer. So, absolutely intolerance and violence exists within Islam, and it is pure um, dishonesty, and in my opinion, moral cowardice to say otherwise. Um, and that's the problem because if you cannot talk about an ideology, if you cannot be honest about an ideology, then you can't address it. I don't think it's good enough to say, oh, it's just terrorism. They don't represent any religion. That's dishonest. Okay, they don't represent Islam, as in they're not the sole representatives of Islam. I think it's just fundamentally dishonest to say they're nothing to do with Islam. I think it's a politically correct way of kind of taking the responsibility from Islam and saying that, oh, well, it's nothing to do with us. You know, Islam is peace. How dare you insult Islam? So 15 years on, I'm not sure that we're that much more honest, sadly. I mean, the nature of terrorism has changed. I don't think we'll have many large-scale attacks like 7/7, thank goodness. But we are going to see, I think, sporadic, smaller scale attacks like what happened in Reading, where you get these lone wolf terrorists, and they won't necessarily be sophisticated. I mean, the London bombers were obviously quite sophisticated. They knew how to make bombs. They knew how to, um, and I'm not saying that takes a rocket scientist, but clearly it's more sophisticated than just going on a knife rampage. Um, I don't think there'll be those sort of scale attacks again. Having said that, there was the attack in Manchester, which was on a similar scale to 7/7, so it's not inconceivable. But you know, huge respect to the security services because every day there isn't a terrorist attack is a day that they're successful. That's something people forget. I mean, they get a lot of criticism, but that's something that needs to be borne in mind as well. Um, I can't imagine what the survivors and the relatives of those who perished went through. And of course, they say that time heals. I think that it depends on the person. A lot of people who've been through traumatic events say that's not true, it doesn't heal, but maybe does something else. Um, but yeah, they're on my mind today.